Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Lots going on, lots that we're doing here at Freedom Watch, and we have two great guests. We have Dennis Silvers of the 19th Hole Golf Podcast. Things have been going on with regard to my case in Palm Beach against the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour has had a lot of investment this week. They think they're riding high, as Frank Sinatra used to sing, riding high in April, shot down in May. That's probably where they're going, frankly, and I'll tell you about that. And in addition, we have Cliff Kincaid of America's Survival. We're going to talk about the United Nations and what's been going on internationally. But first, let me get to a very important issue and topic. We're directly involved in this. As you all know, we represent a number of January 6th peaceful protesters. Freedom Watch is defending them in some criminal cases. And in addition, we have class action lawsuits on their behalf, a very important one in the Northern District of Florida for illegal surveillance. The government had to admit, it was revealed they violated Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the same act that was violated that Edward Snowden revealed years ago when I got two preliminary injunctions enjoining the Obama-Biden NSA. No surprise that now we find that the Biden regime is violating it as well. And if we're successful, we can have the convictions and the sentences and even future prosecutions thrown out if they've used evidence that was obtained illegally against the peaceful protesters, which it appears they have. But here's an interesting dichotomy that we saw this week. You had illegal immigrants in New York City attack a couple cops, beat the crap out of them, not get arrested. Rather, they were arrested, but they were set free on bail by this clown, the DA, Soros DA, Alvin Bragg. They get out of jail and they give the American people the finger. And these guys looked really nasty, really vicious. They look like Scarface, but less attractive than Al Pacino. And then they hop a bus to California. Of course, why not go to California? It's a sanctuary state. At the same time that these thugs from Central America beat up cops and are let free, contrast that with the January 6th peaceful protesters, most of which, the overwhelming majority of which, simply entered into the Capitol peacefully and were charged with misdemeanors and trespass, but they're still getting prison time. They're not being let go. They're forced to get down on their knees and beg forgiveness and confess or get more time. And we have clients who are potentially facing that scenario. Things are getting worse and worse in the worst court in this country, the most corrupt court, the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. No surprise that this is in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is more than a swamp. It's more than a cesspool. It is a haven of evildoers who want to destroy conservatives, people of faith, and those who believe in the vision and creation of our founding fathers, and those who exercise their valid First Amendment rights to protest for what was obviously a fraudulent election. Yes, let me say it again, a fraudulent election. So that's a big story, but go to freedomwatchusa.org, contribute to our cause. January 6th continues on. Joe Biden and his bunch of leftist hacks, his comrades, are going to be using this as one of the primary arguments to be reelected in the fall of 2024, assuming he lives that long, because frankly, the way he is looking these days, health-wise, I think he'll probably die of his own natural causes before then, and then the country will be facing the prospect of a Trump versus a Gavin Newsom at that time. That and the abortion issue are the issues that Biden will be using. Biden has no problem killing babies. The Pope gives him communion, while other people can't get communion. You know, I'm a Christian too, and sometimes I go to Catholic church with my family. I can't get communion, but the Pope gets it. Pope gives it to Biden and Nancy Pelosi. But this is the hypocrisy in this country right now. You have to take a stand. Now let's talk about the United Nations. I remember when I was running for the Senate in Florida, I gave a speech in Orlando. And just as a throwaway line, because I was going through everything I stood for and what I was proposing to get us out of the UN, people literally erupted. They got up on their chairs and started cheering. That's how much the UN is loathed by people who know what it does. Well, we learned this week that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of UN workers in an aid agency in Gaza who are actually part of Hamas, many of whom participated in the terrorist attack on Israel, killing 1,200 people. It is time for us to shut down the UN, get them out of New York City. The United States needs to withdraw, let them build the new UN in Gaza. That's where they belong. But here's also an interesting fact, is that Trump cut off aid to this UN agency. Biden restored it. And now he's cut it off temporarily because he wants to be reelected. But you can bet it's going to be forthcoming again. But at the same time that Biden, of course, has been supporting this UN agency, he is also sanctioning Israeli settlers on the West Bank. He takes no action in sanctioning Hamas. In fact, as of today, he's hesitated for many days after 3 American servicemen were killed. He telegraphs to the Iranians what he's going to do. So they get the Revolutionary Guard leaders out of Syria and Iraq and other places in the Middle East so they don't get hurt. You can bet that this administration is telling Iraq to get out so they don't get hurt. This man is not just a coward, he's likely been bribed by the Ayatollahs, or they have a dossier on him with information which is even worse than what we know about with regard to Hunter Biden and the Biden crime family. Or maybe he just thinks that this is going to get him reelected because he doesn't want any military activities to be accused of igniting yet another war. He's already screwed things up in a major way in Afghanistan. He's been indicted for that and convicted by Freedom Watch for negligent homicide, what occurred there. And of course, we've got a war in Ukraine, and we've got a pending war potentially between communist China and Taiwan. So this is the state that we are in. We're going to have Cliff Kincaid on to talk about that later today. He's an expert in foreign relations and foreign affairs. Then, of course, there's the impeachment of the Republicans of Mayorkas, Alessandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. Ask yourself this question: why are they impeaching Mayorkas when he's simply following the orders of Joe Biden to open the borders to drug traffickers, human traffickers, sex traffickers, and terrorists? This is the Republican Party. They're also cowards, but they're doing this just to try to weaken Biden with regard to assuming he survives of his own volition and health for his election that he would hope for in the fall of 2024. And last but not least, and this is a segue into the next segment, is that this week I was supposed to depose Tiger Woods. It's been postponed because the lawyers of the PGA Tour pulled a maneuver. I don't have time to get into it right now. You can go to freedomwatchusa.org and read about that. But it's interesting that the lawyers who represent Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, and another PGA player who's been involved in the anti-competitive conduct trying to quash the new LIV Golf League, contrary to our antitrust and unfair competition laws, that those lawyers are the same lawyers that represented E. Jean Carroll against President Trump and just got an $83 million verdict in front of a hanging New York jury, representing a woman who finally remembered after 40 years that she was allegedly raped, that she was sexually abused. And when Trump simply denied it, again, he uses colorful language, he gets charged with defamation by this corrupt judge, Lewis Kaplan, who allows the case to continue. It goes in front of a New York hanging jury, and Trump gets hit for $83 million. The lawyer who represents them is now a big hero in the LGBTQ community. She's a lesbian. No aspersions in that regard, but the fact is this is a political hit, and we are up against those lawyers in the PGA Tour case in Florida. They seem to be everywhere. And the local counsel represented Hillary Clinton in the RICO case that Donald Trump had brought, which went in front of a corrupt judge, federal judge down there in Palm Beach, Donald Middlebrooks, who wound up fining the lawyers who represented Trump over $1 million. This is our legal system today, ladies and gentlemen. And this is why I want you to go to freedomwatchusa.org, contribute to our cause. We are your Justice Department. You have no Justice Department. We're here to clean up the legal profession. I believe in it. I wouldn't have started Judicial Watch in 1994 if I didn't, and I still believe in it, but it's being run by a bunch of compromised, corrupt hacks, both at the Justice Department and on the federal bench, particularly in the District of Columbia. So it's very important that you support us because, you see, we're more than just a document collection agency. That's my former group, Get Documents mostly. They have a couple cases, but documents are going to do nothing unless you actually bring hard-hitting cases, citizens' grand juries, citizens' trials, with citizens judges and citizens juries and convict these criminals, and then petition established law enforcement to have them arrested and to be thrown in the slammer where the sun don't shine. We have convictions of 20 years each for Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and James Biden. We have life sentence for Anthony Fauci, who lied to the American people and who gave the seeds of COVID-19 to the Communist Chinese lab in Wuhan, China, and then lied about it under oath to Congress. We, the American people, need to rise up ourselves. If we don't do it, no one will do it. And we can do it with the divine providence of God, as our founding fathers did. But our legal system is corrupt top to bottom. There's some good state judges. I've encountered many of them in Florida because they're elected. They're accountable to the people. But these federal judges, as Jefferson said, unelected, unaccountable, thinking they're there for life. They're not really there for life. They serve for good behavior. And with cowards on the House Judiciary Committee run by Jim Jordan, who hasn't tried to impeach one of these corrupt judges, we, the American people, need to peacefully and legally take matters into our own hands. I'll be right back with Dennis Silvers, a fine golf pundit, my friend, my colleague of the 19th hole. He also has a show called Pick Your Politics. I joke with him sometimes and say, you know, probably most people who don't understand what you're saying thinking it's pick your nose, but it's pick your politics. We'll be right back with Dennis Silvers. Stay tuned. I'm back with a good friend and colleague, Dennis Silvers, the host of the 19th hole. He also has a political podcast called Pick Your Politics. I joke with you, Dennis, in that sometimes I think some of the people that are listening are probably picking their nose. I think that several members of the PGA Tour may be picking their nose today because they can't figure out the news this week that a sports group from Boston called Strategic Sports Corporation invested $3 billion into the PGA Tour. They're doing this to fight the new LIV Golf Tour. The LIV Golf Tour has acquired a number of really fine players, including Jon Rahm of late. I have an antitrust case, our viewers know, and our supporters know, in Palm Beach, where we sought to take the deposition of Tiger Woods this week. That's been postponed. The lawyers, the ones that actually represent E. Jean Carroll against Donald Trump, the woman who figured out 40 years later that she was raped, pulled a maneuver. But we'll succeed with that. That'll happen shortly. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this investment, because much of the criticism that's coming out, even from Golf Channel and NBC, which is very pro PGA Tour, since they consider themselves the partners, there are big contracts between them. And they have also competed unfairly against LIV by smearing LIV players. Even they're saying that this investment really falls short. It basically helps, you know, the elite players of the PGA Tour who can get equity in it, but it does nothing with regard to the golf fan, which is, of course, the basis of my case in Palm Beach, because it does nothing to allow players to compete head to head. And that's what people want to see. They want to see LIV players and PGA Tour players be able to compete in tournaments against each other rather than to have a division here. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you're exactly right. And when I read about that, you know, it's a group, in this group that bought in, it's a group of billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires giving money to a group of people that are millionaires. And as you know, many people involved with the PGA Tour, including the commissioner, are millionaires. And they're finally making this a for-profit deal, and which is a crack up to me, Larry, because these guys are making tremendous money. And, you know, for-profit organizations really don't do that. They've been making money all along. So for people to have thought that PGA Tour has been a nonprofit all of these years, I think they are really sadly mistaken. And more and more players are saying that for the good of the game, we've got to get this settled. There's got to be some kind of an agreement between the two entities, because they are realizing, Larry, LIV Tour is not going away. They are here to stay.
Well, you're right, Dennis. But the agreement is going to have to be to allow them to compete separately, but have them be able to play on both tours as independent contractors.
Right, absolutely. That's
Tour,
ideal.
Yeah, $3
because
billion invested into the PGA Tour. Their net worth now is probably close between 17 billion and $20 billion. The antitrust division, of which I'm an alumnus, will never allow that agreement to go through because it's too much concentration. But what we're trying to do, and this is what we do at Freedom Watch, is that we believe not just in honesty and ethics in government, but we believe in a free market system. And this was a good example of how a monopolist, the PGA Tour, was trying to kill competitors with golf.
absolutely.
And of course, golf, and we'll talk about it more. I'm going to bring you on next week, Dennis, because there's so much going on this week. We can talk more about it. But golf is an outlet for people. It's been shown through studies that it increases your life. It's an opportunity to get out and get some fresh air. And it's become a major industry worldwide.
Yeah.
And it is an industry which is profitable for the United States. It helps our economy. So our case down in Palm Beach is meant to further competition. It's consistent with what Freedom Watch does. And in fact, the name before Freedom Watch, I changed the name after I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2003. It was the Economic Center for Economic Justice, the International Center for Economic Justice. I changed it to Freedom Watch. So we protect not just political freedom and free speech, but also economic freedom. So anyway, Dennis, tell people where they can reach you for your podcast, because you really have a great podcast. We have about 30 seconds.
Well, I appreciate it. We go live on Facebook and YouTube every show. We are on Thursdays at 11 a.m., and that is Pacific Standard Time. You could go to the landing page, 19th Hole Podcast for golfers.com. And I am looking forward to next week to this live event here at Las Vegas Country Club. I hope we get a big turnout to see some really good golf with some really good players, and doing some interviews and seeing you. I think it's going to be a great time. I really do.
Well, and you are a great guy, Dennis. Thank you for everything. I know you've tried to help Liv and my client Patrick Reed. We appreciate that very much, and hopefully.
Hey, my pleasure. Anytime, Larry. You know that.
God bless, and we'll bring you back next week. There's more to talk about. People need to understand.
Love to anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm back with my good friend, colleague Cliff Kincaid of American Survival. Things going on this week. It was revealed, thanks to the Israeli Defense Forces, that hundreds, if not thousands, of UN workers in Gaza are actually card-carrying members of Hamas and participated in the massacre of over 1,200 Israelis, which led to the Hamas-Israeli war. This brings up a bigger issue with regard to the UN. It already has been delegitimized. It's been an issue for many years. Get us out of the UN. Now I think we need to shut it down and throw them the hell out of the United States, period. But I wanted to get your views on it.
Larry, I've been working on this issue for decades. I wrote 2 books. You can see in the back, Global Bondage, Global Taxes for World Government, about the UN problem. It's been a communist front since the days when Alger Hiss, the Soviet spy, co-founded it. He was the first acting Secretary General. But getting at UNRWA, this UN aid agency, is a good first step. But we've been paying, I think, about $1 billion a year to this outfit, which, as you point out, participated in the attack on Israel. Overall, the United States pays about $11 billion, with a B, $11 billion to the UN every year. Trump tried to chip away at that. He withdrew funding for some agencies like UNRWA, but the money keeps flowing, and it keeps subsidizing the destruction of the United States and our place in the world, going after our allies like Israel. Let me tell you one funny story about my battles over the years. There are 2 bills now in the House and Senate to get us completely out of the UN, not just defund UNRWA. They've been introduced in the Senate by Senator Mike Lee and in the House by Congressman Chip Roy. But years ago, as I say, I've been at this for decades. Back, I think it was in 1995, I met with staffers for a Republican congressman from Florida who had introduced a bill to get us out of the United Nations. I have it here. It was then titled H.R. 2535, to provide for withdrawal of the United States from the United Nations, introduced by a congressman from Florida by the name of Joe Scarborough.
He's become a lefty since then, borderline communist, actually.
Well, and you know, it's funny, Axios, the inside scoop newsletter for the Beltway, reported just this week that Joe Biden is obsessed with Morning Joe, that he watches it all the time, gets a lot of ideas, talks to Joe Scarborough on a regular basis, invites Scarborough and his new wife, Mika Brzezinski, to the White House for dinners. And I mean, yeah, Scarborough's gone from being a conservative Republican who wanted to get out of the UN, and I met with his staffers at the time to help him, to now being an extreme leftist. I think part of it is his Trump hatred. He has Trump derangement syndrome because Trump once brought up the fact that an intern had died in one of his congressional offices. He called it an unsolved mystery. And I think Scarborough's never forgiven him for that tweet.
Well, and his wife, what is her name? Mikhail Brzezinski, whatever her name is. She's the daughter of Zbigniew Brzezinski under the Carter administration.
Yeah.
Who was Secretary of State, I believe, or was he National Security Advisor?
National Security.
And he's the one who came up with the idea of deposing, in effect, the Shah.
Yeah.
And now we've seen what happened in Iran. So they're not exactly the two of them national security experts, shall we say.
That's true. You know, Brzezinski, under Jimmy Carter back in 1979, got rid of the Shah, brought to power these terrorists, the mullahs, they call them, who are now the leading sponsor of worldwide terrorism, especially in the Middle East. And as we speak today, I just saw on the news that Biden has unleashed a few airstrikes on some more Iranian-backed terrorists in Syria. Apparently, he's going after a few in Iraq, but he doesn't want to go after Iran. He really should get a declaration of war, in my opinion, but he doesn't want to do that because his main enemy is Israel.
Well, and there's also the fact that he telegraphed. I mean, how many days has it been since our GIs were killed? Over 170 strikes. And he says, oh, we're planning it. So, and I'm sure that behind the scenes, Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, is telling the Iranians, don't worry, we're not going to hurt you that much. Get your Revolutionary Guard out of Syria and out of Iraq, because we're going to bomb a few garbage dumps or whatever the case may be, and we don't want to hurt you. Okay, that's what's happened, because the Iranians moved all their people out. They took them back to Tehran. So
that's exactly right. In fact, Jennifer Griffin of Fox News brought that up at the Lloyd Austin News Conference yesterday, where she said, you're telegraphing what you're going to do. And we already have these reports that the main terrorist leaders, the top terrorists, have left Syria, have left Iraq. They're back in Tehran, as you just said. And so the United States is going in there to attack some garbage dumps, maybe some ammunition depots, and they'll all be resupplied by Iran.
Yeah, it's all for positioning. You know, I think there are three scenarios here, as I've said. Number one, Biden, they may have a dossier on him, which is even worse than what we know about. The Iranian intelligence is quite sophisticated. Or he simply doesn't have the guts to do it. Or he's worried about a wider war going into the election because he's already stoked 2 or 3 of them at this point in time. So it's political. And then, as you're right, is that he favors Iran over Israel. And in fact, he sanctioned Israeli settlers while at the same time is doing nothing of any substance with regard to Iran. You know, this is the perfect moment, Cliff. If you're going to take care of their nuclear program, use this as a pretext to just blow the whole damn thing up right now. I'm not saying kill Iranian people, but take out the military nuclear complex, or at least tell them that we're going to slow you down right now, because they're just a few weeks away from a nuclear bomb, assuming they don't already have one.
It should have happened a long time ago. I personally think Israel ought to take care of the Iranian nuclear bomb problem. Israel can do it. Israel has a nuclear arsenal of over 100 weapons. But if I know they got their hands full with Hamas, and then on the north, Hezbollah, and then Iran, and behind Iran sits Russia. it's a big problem for Israel. But Biden, from the start, has been using every means possible, including the United Nations, to put pressure on Israel to agree to this, quote, two-state solution, whether it's Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. They're all terrorists. And once you give them a state on the border with Israel, this is a state that could openly import weapons from North Korea, China, Iran, Russia, and then Israel's finished. It's the final solution.
Well, they had their two-state solution. Gaza was the Palestinian state. You know, it had its own government. It had its own sovereignty. You got the West Bank as well. And, you know, it was Ariel Sharon years ago who had a good idea before he screwed everything up by turning Gaza over to these heathens, these terrorists. But he was trying to drive the Palestinians into Jordan. You know, I think the percentage is that 70 to 80% of the population in Jordan is Palestinian. That could be their state. And at least there's the Jordan River between Jordan and Israel, some line of demarcation, but that never happened. And consequently, the Palestinians really have no place to go other than to exist where they currently exist on the West Bank and Gaza. But the two-state solution ain't going to happen at this point over anyone's dead body in Israel. That's not going to happen, in my opinion.
And I think eventually, I actually wrote a column about this. I titled it "The Palestinian Removal Act." I hate to sound harsh, but it's brings us back to the old days in America when President Jackson came up with the Indian Removal Act. It was really for their own good, to move them away from fighting the settlers. And they have to move the Palestinians, as you say, in Jordan, some of the other Arab Muslim states, for their own good. And let those other governments run the show for them, because Hamas and the Palestinian Authority can't be trusted.
With all the money we're spending, okay, let's buy them a condominium in Jordan and give them a Cadillac.
Or how about Qatar?
They'll probably take it. They'll probably take it.
How about send them to Qatar, where their leaders are anyway, or Russia, resettle them in Russia, where Hamas leaders regularly meet with the Russian foreign minister. There's plenty of Arab. Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East, our only friend. And as Nixon proved back in '73, you've got to support Israel, as he did. And that enabled Israel to win that war against the Arab Muslim states. And we've got to do the same today, except Biden doesn't want Israel to win.
It's very sad because, I mean, there are Palestinians that are good, that want to integrate with Israel, that highly intelligent. You know, Cliff, you're a student of this. When 1948 came about, most of the Palestinians were feared by the other Arab states because they were well educated. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were the intelligentsia, and they weren't accepted by the other Arab states, and left to basically rot, after that war. And they bear a responsibility in this, but they don't want to take any responsibility, the other Arab states. Egypt doesn't want them. No one wants them.
Oh.
And Israel's had to tend to this situation now for many, many years. And they do have a right to vote in Israel if they live in Israel proper. And, they're fairly well off economically. If you go to, you've been there, I'm sure, to Jerusalem. Many of them work in hotels, they're cab drivers, they're everything else. They do economically pretty well. They don't want to go outside. They are Israelis. And it's a real tragedy. But yet there is an element that has been turned into Hamas types, and it is a real threat, and it's something which can't be ignored. You just don't all of a sudden create a two-state solution after you see what's going on, as of October 7th and otherwise. It would be a death knell for the state of Israel.
But that brings us back to the UN. The UN has been part of this problem for decades. It already recognizes the PLO, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority. It recognizes a so-called Palestinian state that doesn't really exist. They call it Palestine. And that's why we can easily understand, Larry, that the UN, through this UNRWA agency, which gets $1 billion from the United States, was so implicated in the terrorist attack on Israel. It's not only UNRWA, though, that has to be defunded. It's the whole UN. And by the way, not only do we give them $11 billion a year, the UN as a whole, but I've done research into finding out that the UN pension fund, which is set up for bureaucrats who retire from the UN, is now worth, if you can believe this, 80 billion with a B, $80 billion. That's most of our money that's went into most of the funding. So we're paying retired UN bureaucrats, not to mention those still on the payroll.
Well, absolutely. And, the UN, I mean, granted, there is a good place for people to communicate. It doesn't have to be the UN to try to alleviate unnecessary conflict, but the UN has become a repository of foreign spies and terrorists, quite apart from, the communist leanings. It's an opportunity to get people into the country with diplomatic immunity, diplomatic passports, and have them spy on the United States and other countries. And that's what it is. And but anyway, Cliff, tell people where they can reach you. You are truly an excellent expert in foreign affairs, and I'd like them to be able to contribute to your organization.
Well, I've been up to the UN many times fighting with these bureaucrats. It's something. I've done so many reports, 2 books on it. They can go to my website, usasurvival.org. usasurvival.org. Please go to our Give homepage, help us out. We're offering a book, but we've been doing this UN problem for years, and I think because of UNRWA and all this implication in terrorist activity, we may, Larry, finally have a chance to get one of these bills passed.
I hope so. Well, thanks, Cliff, for everything you do. We'll bring you back. Have a very, very good weekend, and God bless you.
You too. Thank you.
I'm back with the verdict. The verdict, ladies and gentlemen, is that we, the American people, as I say over and over again, advertising is repetition, need to rise up. We cannot leave it to our so-called government. You can see just how corrupt it is. Whether it's the legal system, whether it's the international order, the world order, so to speak, of Joe Biden, who sells out the American people at a routine basis, to the Republicans that pay lip service to what needs to be done, but do little of anything in trying to resolve these situations. The House of Representatives controls the funding for the UN, yet they're not cutting it off. In fact, it continues virtually unabated. You don't need President Trump to come into office to cut off UNRWA, this so-called aid agency in Gaza, or for that matter, anywhere else. But we, the American people, as Trump used to say, are stupid. These other people in other countries are smarter than we are, not intellectually, but in terms of actions. And we are sowing the seeds of our own destruction. And internally, we're coming apart at the seams. Whether it's illegal immigration that's running rampant, whether it's rampant crime, which is getting worse and worse, whether it's a Justice Department, which has become a Gestapo to quell all dissent, or whether it's our military, which is completely demoralized at this point. How would you feel if you were over in the Middle East right now? Sitting ducks, 170 plus attacks, probably well over 180 by the time this show airs, with GIs dying, GIs being injured with brain injuries, permanent brain injuries. And your commander-in-chief is playing patty cakes with the Iranian government and tipping them off as to when you're going to strike so they can get their people out of harm's way, while our people, our brave military men and women, continue to be in harm's way. Sound familiar? Afghanistan. The past is a prologue. This president is a threat, not just to Americans, but to the entire world. And the entire world is trembling in its shoes, looking at this weak president who can barely talk, barely walk, who's about ready to check out of this earth for his own health conditions, and with an idiot as a vice president behind him, Kamala Harris, who just cackles like a witch anytime she's asked a question, which she can't answer because, frankly, she's not very bright. Or a Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who gets up and says that he went AWOL during a crucial period in Hamas Israeli war because he got upset because Black people have prostate cancer more than white people. This was his defense yesterday, one of them, using the race card. I'm upset because I'm Black, okay? I'm telling you something. Be upset, but don't be the head of the Department of Defense where our national security depends on it. So I want you all to realize that we have to step up to the plate. We, the American people, we have to take strong action with citizens' grand juries, citizens' trials, citizens' convictions, citizen sentences, hard-hitting cases like we're bringing on behalf of January 6th protesters. We have to speak up. We cannot be afraid. And if we decide to walk into the Capitol, which is our capital, we don't deserve to be prosecuted and put in prison if we don't get down on our knees and confess that we did something wrong. Those protesters, by and large, on January 6th, did nothing wrong. And as I've said many, many times, our founding fathers, particularly Jefferson, would have been at the head of the line going into the Capitol on January 6th. In fact, Jefferson predicted much worse. He said every 20 years or so, the blood of patriots will have to be shed again, adding that what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty. I'm not advocating violence. I'm not advocating hurting anybody. But the fact is, if this continues, this country is going to explode and that we'll get bloody, and we don't want to see that. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. Contribute to our cause with tax-deductible contributions. Join our Justice League. Do it for yourselves, for your children, grandchildren, and future generations, just as our founding fathers did. And you cannot be afraid. You cannot be afraid, or we'll have nothing left. We're already dangerously close to having this country slip away. So I want to thank all of you for tuning in every week. I watch your comments. I go to our YouTube because we put this up on our YouTube channel and the comments at Radio America. And I know that you're behind us, and we appreciate that. But we want you to be with us too, not just behind us. So I'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, remember, the Father and Son will only help us if we help ourselves, just as he helped our founding fathers and the colonialists that against all odds created the greatest nation on earth. Thank you for listening to me.